All right, here's a question I found interesting to address. Why are crossguards shaped the way they are, and why do they generally point in the direction of the edge as opposed to being attached perpendicular to the edge, so that you would hold it like this, assuming that the edge is still pointing forward? And I'm going to argue from a practical point of view, going by how they were used. And you can also use other arguments, like for example, it has been suggested that this has religious symbolic value, like the cruciform basically. But this doesn't seem very likely to me, considering how swords evolved. If you look at different types of swords throughout history, you have a certain gradual progression from one type to the other. If you, for example, compare these two, these are both Scandinavian swords. Just ignore the fact that this is single-edged. There were also double-edged swords with this kind of hilt. And you can see that there is definitely a certain relationship between these two. Like this one here has the beginnings of a crossguard. You can find what I would perhaps call almost proto-crossguards on earlier swords from other cultures, like this Greek sword here is somewhat cruciform in shape, even though at that time, that was long before the idea of Christianity came up. And you also have examples from other cultures, like the Persian shamshir. This one clearly has a crossguard. Same with the Sudanese kaskara, which looks a lot like a medieval arming sword, but it has a Muslim background. But what about the orientation of the crossguard? Why is it not flipped 90 degrees? There is one strange case of a claymore which actually has 4 quillons. So 2 of those do actually point in that direction, perpendicular to the edge. And that is just an odd thing. It's the only example I've seen of that. And I don't know if that was ever intended to be used or if it was just a status symbol. It doesn't look like the most practical thing in the world. You add a lot of weight there. So in order for it to be effective at cutting, you also have to make the blade relatively heavy. So the entire thing is probably quite heavy. Also, the fact that it's just this one case, or at least very rare in general, those weren't common at all. That also tells you something. By the way, keep in mind this is largely speculation because we cannot travel back in time to ask a sword maker, hey, how do you shape this the way you do? What's the idea behind it? And we don't appear to have any written sources explaining why a sword is shaped the way it is. It wouldn't have made sense for people in historical times because it was pretty obvious to them. And they perhaps didn't even second guess why it was the way it is. In case of the German messer, you have this additional guard here called the nagel or nail in English. And this, if you look at the way it protrudes, it's just long enough to cover the knuckles on the hand. So it's not a full extra crossguard. And there is none on this side. And there are some reasons. This gives you a measure of passive protection. If something goes wrong, this may still catch the opponent's blade. If they deliberately snipe your hands, I mean, normally you wouldn't stay out here, at least according to Meyer. But if that happens and they snipe your hand, this is just an extra protection. And there's a reason why there's only one of these and only on one side, or in case of these long swords, there are the rings, so you can actually poke your thumb through there. And the point of that is the thumb grip is pretty common in historical swordsmanship. There are several applications for it. With this kind of cut, it's much more stable with the thumb grip. If I try to do that like this, it just doesn't work as well. It feels a lot more awkward, you have less power, whereas this is quite a strong cut. It can also be done on the other side and in various configurations. So this is quite useful. And also in certain defenses, for example, against the thrust. So why is it not here? Well, for one, generally you're supposed to parry with the edge. And this is a bit of circular reasoning almost, because generally we say that the crossguard is placed this way because you parry with the edge. You parry with the edge because the crossguard is placed the way it is. And there has always been some debate as to whether you parry with the flat or with the edge. But to me, at this point, it seems pretty clear that you're supposed to parry with the edge. For one, in several of the manuals, it's pretty clear that that's what they're doing. Also, you just have more stability in this direction because the blade flexes a lot in that direction. I don't want to rattle down the entire discussion now. Let's just assume that parrying with the edge is what you do. The way I see it, the crossguard in parries mainly comes into play when something goes wrong. Like if you misjudge what kind of cut it is, say for example your opponent throws an undercut. So it's a rising cut. Normally you're supposed to catch it like this, at least according to Meyer. And let's say your opponent feigns and manages to turn that into a downward cut. If this happens, my hand could be cut if the crossguard was not there. The other obvious thing is the murder stroke. This is one of those strange techniques that actually work. So if you wanted to strike with the guard, then it really has to be like this, because you don't want to strike with a sword this way, and I'm sure you can see very clearly why that is. It flexes in this direction, so you could not generate proper force with this. It would just, as soon as it hits the target, it would start flexing away from it, and it would be nowhere near as strong as a strike like this. So in this case, this comes in very handy as a helmet buster, so to speak. If the crossguard was oriented this way, it would be much more in the way, especially when using a shield or buckler. So generally, you would strike like this with a buckler in order to keep covering your hand. If it was like this would collide. It would be in the way in all kinds of awkward manners. I would be much more likely to hit the buckler with the guard. Also, for example, if you want to switch side, not a problem if the guard is oriented this way. If it's like that, doesn't really work. One more thing to consider in case of longswords and kriegsmessers is if you had the guard oriented this way, this would cause some problems in some of the parries. Like this, for example, if I had to hold it like that, I don't know if you can tell, but the guard is pressing on the back of my hand here. It's already unpleasant if I just hold it like this. If I get impact on it, this is going to dig right in there and really beat up the back of my hand. And since you have some important tendons there in the back, it's not the greatest thing. Other side, also, this is really awkward, and you can see here the crossguard is resting against my forearm. So my opponent could use this against me to push against that forearm. If I have it oriented this way, you can see it just sticks out past the forearm. It doesn't rest directly against it. And finally, there is the issue of carrying it. A regular crossguard is flat against your body. If it was like this, it would keep poking you. You may even get stuck as you're trying to pull it. So this is much more streamlined. And it's also another reason for the position of the nail on the messer. It sticks out away from you, edges down. You can draw it like this, no problem. And in fact, it may also be a reason why longswords with ring hilts weren't quite as common as they could have been, because they are just a bit more inconvenient. They're okay to carry depending on exactly how you have it lined up, but it's just not as convenient to carry as just the crossguard. Okay, so that's my understanding of why the crossguard is shaped the way it is and oriented the way it is. If you have anything to add or any disagreements, feel free to discuss down below in the comment section. Civil discussion, mind you, otherwise you will be ended rightly. Thanks for watching.